No offense intended to any of the four of you, but you were not the witnesses I wanted to settle these facts with. I wanted to ask the Department of Justice, but they're not here, so this is going to be a challenge. So I'll see if I can work my way through it. South Carolina passed a voter ID law in 2011, May of 2011. And in 2011, 1/3 of South Carolina's congressional delegation was African American. I may be mistaken. I suspect that South Carolina's percentage of African American members of Congress may have been the highest in the country in 2011. And as we now know, 1 of 2 African American United States senators is from South Carolina in the person of my friend Tim Scott. In addition, South Carolina's governor is of Indian descent. Further to same, South Carolina's voter ID law was similar, if not less restrictive, than those DOJ had pre-cleared in New Hampshire, Virginia, and Georgia. And moreover, South Carolina's plan was similar, if not less restrictive, to plans approved outside of DOJ pre-clearance in states like Tennessee, Kansas, Indiana, which incidentally was affirmed by the United States Supreme Court, Idaho, South Dakota, and Michigan. And just to be clear, South Carolina's voter ID law allowed for the casting of provisional ballots where the voter did not have one of the forms of accepted identification. Now, that's withstanding the fact that South Carolina's new voter ID law made it easier to obtain one of those forms of identification, allowed for the casting of provisional ballots. So, Professor, in your testimony, you had mentioned the significance of having career prosecutors to make these decisions. Did I understand your testimony correctly?
Yes, absolutely.
Would you be interested to know whether or not the leadership of the Department of Justice ignored the opinion of these career prosecutors whose opinion you value so highly?
What I would want to know.
I want to know whether or not I want you to answer my question before you answer the one you want to answer, okay? Answer my question, and it is this. Would you be interested in knowing whether or not leadership in the Department of Justice ignored the advice of career DOJ attorneys?
Of course, but ignoring and disagreeing are not the same thing. I don't know what happened in that case.
Exactly, and we don't either. You know why? Because they won't tell us. They have ignored Senator Graham's letter. So I'm asking you, will you join Senator Graham and me in asking the Department of Justice whether or not they ignored advice from career attorneys to pre-clear South Carolina's plan? Will you join us today?
No, I think the deliberative process within the department is incredibly important. You can't get candid.
Is that a yes?
No,
will you join us today?
No, Congressman. If you can't get candid views from career staff, if they know.
Are you interested in whether or not those candid views were ignored?
You know, as a citizen, I would be interested whether they were ignored, but ignored.
As a citizen, how about as a law professor?
Yeah.
Would you be interested in whether or not sound legal advice was ignored for political expediency? Would you be interested in that?
Sure, but I think the proof in the pudding in this case is precisely in the opinion of the district court, which I referred to.
Oh, I've read the opinion. And by the way, who won?
And by the way, it
who
was
won?
a decision, by the way.
South Carolina won.
By the way,
and here's the difference. I'm going to reclaim my time. Here's the difference. There was a 1.6% difference in African Americans who had accepted photo IDs, acceptable photo IDs, and white South Carolinians. 1.6% difference. 20 years ago, when I was working on voting rights cases, that was considered de minimis. Now it costs South Carolina $3.5 million to defend that 1.6% difference. But it also means this, that my fellow South Carolinians who are African American are 1.6% less likely, less able to enter a federal courthouse because an ID is required there also. And they are 1.6% less likely to be able to board an aircraft because it also requires a photo ID. They're 1.6% less likely to enter the front door of this building because it also requires a voter ID. So my time is up. I would simply say this to the men and women who have dedicated their careers at the Department of Justice, to the apolitical, nonpartisan enforcement of the law. I'm sorry that we're having to have this hearing. And I'm also sorry to the state of South Carolina that it had to spend $3.5 million to have a district court ultimately, a three-judge panel, ultimately agree with us. And I'm sorry for the Department of Justice that they put politics ahead of the law. And with that, I would recognize the gentlelady.